Hello, welcome back to Chat About It, Don't Shout About It with me, Rachel, the Queen of the Woke, as crowned by one of my haters. Don't forget to subscribe. Around 95% of you are returning viewers and you're not yet subscribed. So what are you doing? Hit that sub button, hit that bell, and come and join us. Thank you to everyone who has subscribed already. I really couldn't do this without you. Today is Doctor Who Sunday, and it is our time to chill, and we will return to the crazy news tomorrow at 4 p.m. So if you want to join us for that, please do. Today we are looking at the Arc of Infinity, which was voted by you, the subscribers. If you would like to actually vote on the current poll, then that's absolutely fine. Please head on over to the community page to vote on it there.
Arc of Infinity is a Fifth Doctor story. It was written by Johnny Byrne, directed by Ron Jones, and it aired between 3rd to 12th of January 1983 to 7.2 million people on average. The Doctor, played by Peter Davison, and Anissa, played by Sarah Sutton, are travelling in the TARDIS. Suddenly, a mysterious being tries to merge with the Doctor, causing him to pass out. He shortly discovers that his biometric data has been stolen. This causes him to return to Gallifrey. He takes Nyssa with him. However, as soon as he arrives, there is an attempt to capture him, so he makes a break for it. He ends up getting shot by Commander Maxwell, played by good old 60 Colin Baker, and under arrest. A warrant is issued for its immediate termination. The Doctor goes through with the termination, and this is where he finally meets Omega, the being that has been wanting to merge with him, the renegade Time Lord who existed only in antimatter before this. The Doctor discovers that if he merges with Omega, then Omega will be revived. The Doctor must prevent this from happening. Omega shows that he has Tegan under his control. Tegan tells the Doctor that Omega is in Amsterdam. The Doctor and Nyssa get to Amsterdam and find Tegan. They then have to find Omega, who had taken on the Doctor's form after merging. Can they find him before he goes boom?
I felt like I just gave a really long description for this particular story. This is a good story, but I will actually admit it is not my favourite story. My favourite Peter Davison story is Enlightenment, and actually that's my favourite story overall for the Doctor Who fandom. Whenever I do a review of something, I actually try to remember what it was like the first time I actually watched it. I've seen this story multiple times, and I remember exactly how I felt the first time I actually watched this story. I remember that when I first saw this story, I didn't know really what was happening. I knew that it was a renegade Time Lord of some description that was actually returning, and that potentially wasn't actually a good thing. And that was pretty much about all I could actually grasp with that particular first watch through. It took me about 3 watches to actually understand the story completely. And even on the rewatch for making this review, I was still really hesitant about my understanding of it, even though I understand the story completely now. It's not that I think it's convoluted. I guess it is a bit convoluted, but it's actually more complicated than convoluted, if you understand what I mean. And I don't think it really helps that there's 10 to 15 minutes of just running in part 4 of this particular story. The running really doesn't add anything to it. This story probably could have easily been a 3-parter and you could have left it at that. However, I know that JNT was really longing to actually get the show abroad and do some abroad filming, so that probably plays a lot into this. And I think that's what adds to the story actually being very complicated, and I think it's not as likable as the 2 Doctors, even though the 2 Doctors is lower rated in the audience viewing. And by that, I actually mean viewing figures. I actually felt like the running was a mere filler for this particular story. Maybe they didn't know what else they needed to do for this story, and maybe they actually had limited time filming in Amsterdam, and maybe their permissions for filming were also very limited. There's certain loopholes that you have to go through in order to film in certain places.
Admittedly, it was nice having a different bit of scenery. It added to it, even though it wasn't really necessary. It also served as a reintroduction to Tegan, who we had all assumed had officially left the TARDIS after her last episode of Time Flight. She also has new hair, which looks much better. This would have been because she didn't know she was coming back to Doctor Who. Tegan is my favourite companion for the classic era. One thing that I always found was that the other female companions didn't always put their foot down with the Doctor. Tegan always did, and I liked that. It was refreshing, and it was a slightly different take on a companion, which we hadn't seen before.
The downside to Tegan returning was the costume. The costume is not what I would actually consider to be practical. It looked really uncomfortable, and she really did have to run in it a lot. And not only that, she didn't just wear it for this story, she wore it for multiple stories after. That couldn't have been easy.
It was smart the way they reintroduced her as well with travel. It makes sense, seeing as the last time we see her is in Heathrow, and then we see her at the airport in Amsterdam. It goes full circle. Although the Doctor didn't seem too impressed that she was rejoining the TARDIS. Interesting acting here from Peter Davison. He always said that Nyssa was the Doctor's greatest adversary for his incarnation, which I would actually agree with, but I never thought that he would have been that disappointed. I'm not sure if it was scripted or if it was directed or if it was an acting choice that was cleared by the director. I never got the impression that he hated Tegan, but would get easily frustrated with her, more so with Tom Baker. Arc of Affinity is one of Peter's better performances as the Doctor. Not that his performances as the Doctor are bad. I think this is because he's getting to grips with what he wants to actually do with the Doctor here. He knows the definite direction he's going in. He relishes the stronger scripts as well, and even though this is not my favourite one, this is one of the stronger ones in the terms of writing.
He definitely had a lot more to do. His Doctor seems much smarter than in previous stories, which is a really weird thing to say because you and I both know that the Doctor is very intelligent. The thing about Peter's Doctor is, even though he is actually completely different from all of the other Doctors, I would say, you can still see that he is the Doctor.
I think that his Doctor is perhaps more coy. You don't really know what he is up to in this episode at all, other than trying to find out who took his data. He seems to go on a lot of guesswork and luck from what it appears to be on the surface, but that is not necessarily the case. I think he reacts a lot on inkling and instinct here. He had to take a lot of risks without knowing what the outcome will be exactly. That's what makes up part of the Doctor though, acting in an intelligent way, but also taking the risks, and in this he takes probably one of the biggest risks that he has taken so far in his time as the Doctor. He has no choice after all. Omega is after his biometric data so that he can merge with the Doctor and be revived. It's important for the Doctor to take the risks that he does. He really does take them for sure. He allows his termination to go ahead so that he could risk meeting the Time Lord. However, it is unbeknownst to the Doctor as to who is trying to merge with him. We don't actually find out his name until episode 3. We learn about Omega. We find out that he was a Time Lord and that had been terminated, but that's really about it. We don't really find out much else, and nor have we since. Omega is one of those characters that remains untouched. There are some characters that keep coming back, but Omega has remained untouched, and it should stay that way. We don't need a Sutekh 2.0.
Now, I actually do like Omega, despite anything that I may have just said about Omega, but I would say that I actually think he is underutilized in this plot, and I think a lot of that is owed to the fact that they actually spend 10 to 15 minutes of part 4 actually just running with no intention other than catching him, and he's trying to escape. That meant double the running for Peter Davison, of course, naturally. But I felt like they could actually have done a fair bit more with Omega, perhaps in the studio in part 4, rather than, just the shrinking head and things like that. They make him out to be this really, really scary being that shouldn't be doing what he is doing, but then just fill it with running.
The best part of Omega was his oozing green gunge deflating head that seemed to be going on for an eternity. That probably could have been shortened a bit and had more of a confrontation with Omega in body form. Give Peter Davison a bit more of a challenge, because the reveal of Omega looking like the Fifth Doctor was absolutely brilliant. The shock that everyone's favourite hero is now a bad un was quite a big shock. Going from looking like the Fifth Doctor into a deformed Omega was a brilliant transition too. They could have really risked showing the actor's face, but they chose not to. Sometimes that's the best way though with these baddies in Doctor Who, not showing their faces so that it doesn't actually take away from the shock factor and the impact that they actually have. Their costumes in this, aside from Tegan's, are really good as well. The Urgons don't look ridiculous and the Time Lords look as elegant as ever. Now I will just chat about good old Sixie. Colin took the role as he thought he would never get the chance to play the Doctor, so he took on the very astute, assertive Commander Maxwell. Little did we know that this would have an impact on him getting the role. Yes, there are other things, of course, I know, that aided him in getting it. However, he does like to joke that he actually shot the Doctor. This may be just me, but it's a major downside to this story that we could only have Colin for 3 episodes because most of it was just taken up by running in episode 4. The effects in this episode are really quite good for the time as well. The termination and sequence and the merging sequences were so good visually. The zapping of the characters were very simple, but at the same time they were very effective. The Matrix sequences, whilst not looking particularly comfortable, look very good, although they do remind me of when Adric has been captured by the Master in Castrovalva. Now, I mentioned just a moment ago that they underused Omega. In The Deadly Assassin, we see Tom Baker go through all sorts of weird stuff in The Matrix. For those who have watched this when it was originally released and had seen The Deadly Assassin, would this scene have been very underwhelming to you with the Doctor and Omega in The Matrix? I can't remember if I had actually seen The Deadly Assassin or not when I first watched Arc of Infinity. I am swaying to more likely not than had. I asked because I could see why you would think it was underwhelming. The power of the Matrix that plays havoc with the mind was very clear in The Deadly Assassin. It was made a point of. It was something that was not to be dabbled with lightly. The concern that you would have with this is that when the Matrix was introduced back in Tom Baker's day, means that it is something that you could bring back really easily and make an explanation for something happening. The same sort of thing happens with the Time Lords too. Now that's actually one of the things that New Who excelled at. They didn't bring back the Time Lords for a while. They quantum locked them basically. They put them into the Time War. That meant they couldn't actually be a fallback, and it works. The introduction of the Time Lords in the War Games means that they can then bring back the Time Lords anytime and use them as an excuse, or just use them as an excuse in saying it in passing only. Are they at this point in the Arc of Infinity becoming overused? What do you think? There's also a trope of the renegade Time Lords that seems to form whenever the Time Lords have to come back into Doctor Who. In The Deadly Assassin, it was the return of the Master, and in this, it was the return of Omega, assisted by Hedin. And naturally, of course, they want us to be stumped as to who had done it, but because they have repeated a similar sort of storyline several times over, it really wasn't that surprising that it was Hedin, who is played by Michael Gough, if I'm correct. Oh, and before I forget, the Doctor and Nyssa holding a gun, I will remain consistent here. I call it out all the time. Why are they doing that? Particularly the Doctor. I will also say this, in addition to spending a lot of time running, they also spend a lot of time in the TARDIS, in particular for the Davison era. Every single part in this story has the TARDIS in it. I feel like I've said a lot of negative things about this particular story, but overall it is still a very good story that does have the element of a whodunit, and whilst it may not be the strongest, it certainly does challenge the mind and the understanding of the person watching it, and it certainly did mine.
So there you go. Let me know what you think about this particular story. Naturally, I have left lots out, so please do actually add your comments below. That would be great to hear from you. I will be back with crazy stuff tomorrow at 4 p.m. Chat about it, don't shout about it. Like the video if you would like to. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.